Hello and welcome to this video lesson. Today I'm going to show you how to create a dramatic apprentice style portrait in Photoshop CS5. So here we have our original image, our portrait shot against a blue background, a little bit of backlighting, and what we're going to do is use a series of Photoshop techniques to extract the subject, place in a new background and get the apprentice style look. So our final image will look just like this. So we'll get straight into it, and I'll start off by closing down these two images. I'll then just open up our portrait before.cr2 file in Adobe Camera Raw. Right, now the first thing we want to do is just make sure that our clipping warnings are on, and you can do that by just hitting U and O on your keyboard, and as you do that you'll see a blue overlay marking the shadows that are being clipped and red for the highlights that are being clipped. So now we've got those switched on, we want to improve this portrait within ACR before taking it through to Photoshop CS5. So the first thing we want to do is just brighten up the portrait a little bit. So we're going to adjust the exposure, just increase that up to about 1.05. And as we do that, we can just see the highlight clipping in the background increase, but also we're just pulling back some of the detail within the suit. Now we're just going to decrease the color temperature, so we're just cooling that down a little bit. We're going to take that down to 4850, and we're just going to decrease the tint a little bit, just down to about -10. Now that we've done that, we just want to reduce that clipped highlight in the background. So we're going to push the recovery up to about 20. That hasn't completely got rid of that clipped highlight, but it's reduced it quite a lot. And now we want to pull out some of the darker detail in the suit. So we're just going to increase the fill light from 0 up to +32. And as we do that, we can see the contrast of the image falling a little bit, but we can sort that out very quickly by just increasing the clarity up to +60. And you just see how the contrast, especially in the finer detail, suddenly improves. And then finally, just to boost the skin tones and the colour a little bit, I'm going to increase the vibrance from 0 to +30. Now, not too many adjustments within ACR. So now that we've finished with our ACR adjustments, you can just click Open Image to open that within Photoshop CS5. Now that we're in Photoshop CS5, first thing we want to do is start to extract the background, and we can do this very quickly using the Quick Selection brush. So if I just go over to the right to my layers palette, just so I can see the layers properly, then I want to select the Quick Selection brush, and by default you'll have the magic wand tool selected. Just left click and hold with your mouse, select the Quick Selection tool, and now very quickly just want to draw over the blue background. Once I've made my first selection, just make sure the Add to Selection brush is selected. I'm going to select on the right hand side, and I also want to select in that background as well. So again, just left click and drag over the brown background. Now that we've done that, just quickly zoom into the image by using Ctrl+ or Apple+, hold down spacebar, and we'll just very quickly navigate around the image just to make sure that the whole of our subject is selected and no major parts are missing. You'll often find a little bit of the shirt might be included, but it's done a really good job here. Just go Ctrl-0 to get that image to fit back in screen. Now that I've done that, I want to change the selection from selecting the background to selecting our subject. So we can do that very quickly by going up to Select, down to Inverse, and we now can see those running ants just going around our subject rather than the background. Now we need to refine our edge, so if we click the Refine Edge button, first thing to do is from the View mode, I want this to be on black. Now I just want to make sure that I've selected the Refine Radius tool. Just increase the brush size slightly, just so that I've got a slightly larger brush, and then all I'm going to do is very quickly just paint around the hairline. So if I do that all the way around, And what Photoshop does is to carefully analyse the contrast between the hairline and the background. It just makes a much better cutout than just using a quick selection brush. Now that I've done that, I can refine that further by clicking the Show Radius. Just click that once. Now I want to use the Smart Radius and I want to take that up to 1.6, and as I do that you'll suddenly see a line appear all the way around our subject, and that's just helping to refine the edge once again a lot better than you would just using the quick selection tool. Now at the bottom of the window, just to help with that selection a little bit more, I'm going to tick the decontaminate colours. I'm going to increase the amount up to 70%. And what that's going to do is just to help reduce the blue that's coming through on the hair and also on the edge of the suit. So quite a normal thing when you're making this type of selection. Now in the bottom I want output 2, new layer with mask. Now all I have to do is hit OK and we'll see a new layer appear with our extracted subject perfectly cut out. Okay, before I continue, I'm going to rename this background copy layer subject. So if I just click on the text in the layer and I'm just going to type in subject. Okay, now I want to apply my backlit background. So if I click back onto the background layer, just make sure the visibility icon is switched on. Then I want to make sure I've got my gradient tool selected. And in the toolbar at the top, I'm just going to left click the gradient preview to bring up the gradient editor. Now here I want to create a blue gradient and I'm going to put in an extra point just to create a more realistic background. So to add my colour points, I'll click the bottom left colour stop, double click to bring up the select stop colour window. Then using the pipette, which is will automatically appear, just going to click the light blue to the left of the neck. Just click OK to set that, and that set the first point for my gradient. Now at the 50% position, just left click once, double click the colour swatch. This time I'm just going to quickly enter in the RGB values for a darker blue. So here I'm going to enter 72 for red, green I'm going to enter 111, and for blue 139. Just hit OK to apply that. Finally, far right colour stop, double click again. I'm just going to enter red 20, green 51 and blue 72. So quite a dark blue. Hit OK to apply that. And now I've got my gradients created, so I can just click OK to apply that to the gradient. Now I need to create a new blank layer to add my gradient background to. Make sure I've got the gradient tool selected. We've got our gradient preview here, and I've selected radial gradient from the options in the top tool palette. Now if I just click in the centre of the neck, pull that up to the top and release, and we'll see our backlit gradient preview appear in the background. Now that we've got our background in place, I want to start applying a series of adjustments to our subject layer to really get the apprentice style look. So if I click back onto my subject layer, go down to my adjustment layers and select curves. And before I make any adjustments, I just want to clip my curves layer to the subject layer. And I can do that by holding down Alt, dragging in between the curves and the subject layer. You'll see the cursor change, left click once, and that'll clip the curves layer to the subject layer. Now what this means is that any adjustments I make to the curves will only affect the subject layer, and it'll leave the background layer alone. So what I want to do here is just create a subtle S-curve with values for my shadow regions with an output value of about 73, input value of about 78. Then in the highlights I want to change that to an output value of about 179 and an input value about 144. And as I do that, you'll see the highlights just lighten a little bit and also increase the contrast of the entire image. Once I've done that, just hit the small X to close down the curves dialog window. And as I've done that, you can see the colour has just boosted a little bit too much red influence. So the next thing we want to do is adjust the colour balance of the image. So again, going to go down to our adjustment layers, select colour balance, and as we did before, we just want to clip that colour balance layer to our curves layer. So again, it'll only affect the subject. And this time, starting off with our midtones, I want to set the value for the top box to -18, magenta to green to 15, and my yellow to blue to about 50. Then I'm going to click the shadows, red 4, magenta to green of -9, and yellow to blue to -7. And finally, highlights, again just going to adjust those to -12, -1 and 14. That's given the image quite a cool look. And what you need to do when you're using the colour balance is just to go through the midtones, highlights and shadows just to see how each of those affects the image. So when we're happy with that, just hit the X to close that down. I switch off the preview and we can just see the difference those changes to the colour balance has made. And now I just want to pull back those colours a little bit, so reduce the overall saturation. So again, down to my adjustment layers, simple hue saturation layer. Again, I need to clip that to the colour balance layer, and I'm going to reduce the saturation down to -30. So again, I'll just hit that to close that down. And the final adjustment layer I want to apply to our subject is a levels adjustment. So again, down to my adjustment layers, down to levels, and again, just clip that to the hue saturation layer. Then I'm going to increase the shadows to 45, the midtones just to 1.16, and I'm going to leave the highlights exactly where they are. And you can just see how that's really helped to improve the contrast. One problem here though is that the detail in the jacket has now completely disappeared. So if I just close that down, hold down Control and click onto the subject layer mask on the subject layer, then just make sure the mask in my levels layer is selected. Go over to my brush tool, make sure that I've got a black brush selected and that I've got just a soft edged brush. Just increase the size of that. Then I can very quickly just paint over the jacket just to bring back a little bit of that detail. Basically, we're masking out the effect of that levels layer. Once I finish that, just go Control D to deselect. And now I'm going to take a look at the hairline just to make sure that that's blending in perfectly with the background. So what I'll do is just zoom into the image. So just use Control Plus to zoom in. Hold down the spacebar and left click just to move it around, zoom in a little bit more. And we just see there's a little bit of haloing going along around the hairline. So if we click back onto our subject layer, then if we go over to our burn tool, take our exposure to 15%, want to make sure that our highlights are selected in the range, and then we're just very quickly just going to paint over the very edge of the hairline. What this is doing is just dulling down the haloing and just helping to blend in that hairline with the background. It'll also just help to improve the contrast, get a more realistic effect and blend between the hairline and the backdrop. So as you can see, very quick, and that's blended in quite nicely. So I'll just zoom back out using Control 0. And the final thing I want to do is just to do a little bit of dodging and burning around the face itself just to improve the contrast and finish off our picture. So again, if I have the burn tool, this time I want to make sure shadows are selected. I've set my exposure to 5%. Just increase the size of the brush. I'm just going to brush over the sides of the face just to darken those down. Also over the eyes and mouth just to help improve the contrast and really make them stand out. Once I'm happy with that, just switch to the dodge tool. Again, make sure range is at highlights and exposure is 5%. And here, just going to again, just go over, just boosting the highlights a little bit. also on the hairline, just to bring out the hair as well. So now that I've finished with the adjustments to the subject, if I click onto the top layer, top levels layer, down to subject layer, holding down shift, making sure they're all selected, then Control E, and I can flatten all of those adjustment layers and the subject layer down into one. I'm doing that rather than flattening it completely down because I'm going to apply a little bit of sharpening, and I only want that to be applied to our subject rather than the background as well. So now that's done, go to Filter, down to Sharpen and Smart Sharpen. I want to just make sure that I'm zoomed into the eyes. I'm going to take the amount down to about 70 and the radius to about 1.6. Just click into the preview and release just to see the before and after. Once I'm happy with the amount of sharpening there, just scroll around a little bit just to check that that's all okay. Just hit OK to apply. And then from the palette options, just select Flatten Image to finish off our apprentice style portrait.